the cause of bondage. Therefore, such work is not auspicious. Everyone has his proprietary right in regard to prescribed duties, but should act without attachment to the result. Such disinterested, obligatory duties doubtlessly lead one to the path of liberation. Arjuna was therefore advised by the Lord to fight as a matter of duty without attachment to the result. His non-participation in the battle is another side of attachment. Such attachment never leads one to the path of salvation. Any attachment, positive or negative, is cause for bondage. Inaction is sinful. Therefore, fighting as a matter of duty was the only auspicious path of salvation for Arjuna. So, yeah, these three different types of duties are described here by Srila Prabhupada: routine work, emergency work, and desired work. So wouldn't you say right now that during this virus pandemic, we're in a kind of emergency work? We're not able to go to work or go to school, but we have a different type of work during this pause, you would say. So I would suggest that if we can patiently try to accept the situation and try to use our time wisely to go, it's an opportunity to go deeper in Krishna consciousness and in our realization of Krishna consciousness. And maybe we don't have to spend so much time commuting in cars and all that kind of thing, and we can take more time to study, to read, to chant, and to pray to Krishna to give us realization of what's going on here. So Srila Prabhupada explains here that when we're attached to the work we do, we become the cause, sort of artificially, and we try to be the enjoyer, and by the same token, we have to suffer when we try to enjoy the results of our work. It's like the example that's given of the one bird that's eating the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree while the super soul bird is just watching. So to act as a matter of duty, to do what's supposed to be done, this is to act in the mode of goodness and to become eligible to jump off into transcendence. Like we have to go to an airport to fly in an airplane, right? So you have to go to the mode of goodness in order to go to the place of transcendence. So in text number 38 of this chapter, Krishna says, very beautifully, he says, "Do thou fight for the sake of fighting, without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by so doing you shall never incur sin." And then in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, action in the mode of goodness is described in verse 1823. That action which is regulated and which is
Mataji, you froze again. We can't hear you.
class. And after the class, Satsvarupa Maharaj, who was our temple president, he asked this young man, he said, after breakfast, he invited him for breakfast, and he said, after breakfast, would you be able to help us out a little bit by sweeping the temple? And this young man, who was, of course, happy to stay for breakfast, but he said, no, you see, I can't do. To do would be duality. And it was contaminated by an impersonal type of philosophy, whereby he thought that if he would do any action, he would be contaminated by material action. He didn't understand that to sweep the temple was a sacred act and devotional service to Krishna. So he thought he was a very realized person and that he should not do anything except he was happy to eat prasadam, right? But so Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita, especially in the 4th chapter, where he talks about when one sees action in inaction. It sounds kind of paradoxical, seeing action in inaction. In other words, seeing that someone is acting without wanting the results of action, and then seeing inaction in action, seeing that someone who is acting, maybe running all over the place, is really doing nothing at all. So he wouldn't sweep the temple out of laziness, and his laziness was being disguised as spiritual realization. So he thought he was above all of that. So let me go to the next verse. Yogasta kuru karmani sangam tyakva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. Purport. Krishna tells Arjuna that he should act in yoga. And what is that yoga? Yoga means to concentrate the mind upon the Supreme by controlling the ever-disturbing senses. And who is the Supreme? The Supreme is the Lord. And because he himself is telling Arjuna to fight, Arjuna has nothing to do with the results of the fight. Gain or victory are Krishna's concern. Arjuna is simply advised to act according to the dictation of Krishna. The following of Krishna's dictation is real yoga, and this is practiced in the process called Krishna consciousness. By Krishna consciousness only, one can give up the sense of proprietorship. One has to become the servant of Krishna, or the servant of Krishna. That is the right way to discharge duty in Krishna consciousness, which alone can help one to act in yoga. Arjuna is a Kshatriya, and as such he is participating in the Varnashram Dharma institution. It is said in the Vishnu Purana that in Varnashram Dharma, the whole aim is to satisfy Vishnu. No one should satisfy himself, as is the rule in the material world, but one should satisfy Krishna. So unless one satisfies Krishna, one cannot correctly observe the principles of Varnashram Dharma. Indirectly, Arjuna was advised to act as Krishna told him. So in this verse, it's explained that we should give up our selfish desires to please ourselves. But in fact, when we try to act to please Krishna, we ourselves also become pleased. That's the mystical nature of Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada explains here that gain and victory, those are Krishna's concern. And our concern is just to serve Krishna and allow him to dictate the results of the action. So he's talking about giving up a false sense of proprietorship. Actually, we think that this body is me and everything related to the body is mine. So this is our illusion in this material world. But rather than acting like that, acting as the false masters of the universe, we should try to be like just a tiny cog in the wheel, just a tiny part acting for the pleasure of Krishna. And when we try to satisfy him, as I said, we also become satisfied. So Srila Prabhupada would so often give the example of how the different parts of the body are all serving the stomach. And it's such a very practical example. If my fingers stick themselves into the food and try to enjoy independently, it's absurd, right? Or if I stick my foot in the prasadam, that of course would be an offense. But if all the different parts of the body serve the stomach, if the hand puts the food in the mouth and the mouth chews and digests, and then the digestion goes to the stomach, then all the parts of the body can be nourished and satisfied. So practical, right? So let me go on to verse number 49. Dure nahyavaram karma buddhi yoga dhananjaya buddho sharanam anvichcha kripana palahetavaha. O Dhananjaya, keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service, and in that consciousness surrender unto the Lord. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. Strong language by Krishna here, huh? So purport. One who has actually come to understand one's constitutional position as an eternal servitor of the Lord gives up all engagements save working in Krishna consciousness. As already explained, Buddhi Yoga means transcendental loving service to the Lord. Such devotional service is the right course of action for the living entity. Only misers desire to enjoy the fruit of their own work, just to be further entangled in material bondage. Except for work in Krishna consciousness, all activities are abominable because they continually bind the worker to the cycle of birth and death. One should therefore never desire to be the cause of work. Everything should be done in Krishna consciousness for the satisfaction of Krishna. Misers do not know how to utilize the assets of riches which they acquire by good fortune or by hard labor. One should spend all energies working in Krishna consciousness, and that one will make one's life successful. Like misers, unfortunate persons do not employ their human energy in the service of the Lord. So here, it's strong language talking about misers. So what's a miser? A miser is someone who has lots of wealth, but they just keep it squirreled away in their mattress or in their bank, and they're always checking their bank balance, and they never want to spend the money for anything worthwhile. So Prabhupada is explaining here that misers don't know how to utilize the assets of riches that they acquire, either by good fortune or by hard labor. So we want to be able to use the riches we've been given to please Krishna, to satisfy Krishna. And this is what Prabhupada describes as Buddhi Yoga, or Krishna also uses that word in the verse. Buddhi Yoga, this is the yoga of intelligence, to surrender unto the Lord and work in the consciousness that whatever I do within the modes of nature is should be done as an offering to Krishna. So Krishna doesn't care so much what you're doing, but it's what matters is the consciousness with which it's done. And in that way, he maintains the living entities. But out of false ego, we think that we're maintaining ourselves. We think by my work as a doctor or as a laborer or as a professor or as a business person, everything is coming by my own efforts. But in fact, Krishna is maintaining us, and he is blessing us with so many riches and facilities. And all he asks is that we use them and offer them back to him in consciousness of him. So, yeah. So text number 50. Buddhi yukto jahatiha ube sukrita duskrite tasmad yogaya yujyasva yoga karma sukausalam. A man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad reactions even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, which is the art of all work. Purport. Since time immemorial, each living entity has accumulated the various reactions of his good and bad work. As such, he is continuously ignorant of his real constitutional position. One's ignorance can be removed by the instruction of Bhagavad Gita, which teaches one to surrender unto Lord Sri Krishna in all respects and become liberated from the chained victimization of action and reaction. That's such a great phrase, isn't it? The chained victimization of action and reaction, birth after birth. So Arjuna is therefore advised to act in Krishna consciousness, the purifying process of resultant action. So in this verse, it's said that Krishna yoga is the art of all work. So it's interesting, Srila Prabhupada sometimes talks about Krishna consciousness as a science, and here this type of yoga is called an art. So Krishna consciousness is both an art and a science, which is really beautiful. It's a science in the sense that it's handed down with all details of how it should be practiced by great acharyas and teachers and gurus coming in disciplic succession, faithfully following and not by imagination, but faithfully handing the delicate fruit down from master to disciple to disciple to disciple to disciple, so that that fruit reaches us on the ground, and it reaches us intact, just the way it was first given by Lord Krishna. So Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to the sun god, and as he says in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and now he's speaking it again to Arjuna, because whenever that disciplic succession becomes broken, he has to rejuvenate it and speak it again. So yeah, to act in Krishna consciousness and become liberated from the chained victimization of action and reaction, birth after birth. It's a very purifying process of getting out of this, the cycle of repeated birth and death. It goes around and around and up and down. Did you ever see a merry-go-round in a park or something like that? The horses are going around and around, but they're also going up and down, up and down, up and down. And children think it's really fun. But when we're in the repeated cycle of birth and death, it's actually not such a merry-go-round. It's actually quite miserable to be going up and down again and again, going to heavenly planets, going down to hellish planets, going into animal species, going up to become a Brahma even, and maybe then become an insect, and up and down, and then going back into the unmanifest body of Lord Vishnu, and then having to come out again and try again. And all the time, the Kali Yuga, as we notice, at least I'm noticing, maybe you're noticing too, that the Kali Yuga is getting worse, right? The suffering is getting worse, and the challenges are becoming more acute. So this Krishna consciousness, it's an art in the sense that the art of all work. To do this, to rid ourselves of good and bad reactions, what's the art? The art is to offer it to Krishna. So before I begin to cook dinner, or before I begin to do anything, I can say, my dear Lord Krishna, this activity is meant as an offering for you. If I'm going to go to work, I say, I'm going to work for your pleasure. Or if I'm going to school, I'm doing this for your pleasure. Now I'm going to read Bhagavad Gita, and I pray for some realization by your mercy. So in this way, we connect in yoga to Krishna, and it becomes a great art as well as a science, right? So let me read the last verse that I'm planning to read, which is 51. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi palam tyaktva manisinaha karma bandha vinirmuktai padam gacchanti anamayam. By thus engaged devotion, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. In this way, they become free from the cycle of birth and death, and attain the state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead. Purport. The liberated living entities belong to that place where there are no material miseries. The Bhagavatam 10:14-58 says, Samashitaye pada palavaplavam mahatpadam punyaya somurare pavam buddhir vatsapadam param padam yatvi padam natesham. This is a verse that Prabhupada quoted so often and would sometimes even sing. He says, so this is the translation, for one who has accepted the boat of the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of the cosmic manifestation and is famous as Mukunda, or the giver of mukti, the ocean of the material world is like the water contained in a calf's hoof print. So tiny, right? How big is the foot of a calf? Maybe about the size of a $50, right? So that's how big that gigantic ocean becomes for someone who takes shelter of Krishna. The ocean of the material world is like the water contained in a calf's footprint. Param Padam, or the place where there are no material miseries, or Vaikuntha, is his goal, not the place where there is danger in every step of life. So then Prabhupada explains, owing to ignorance, one does not know that this material world is a miserable place where there are dangers at every step. Out of ignorance only, less intelligent persons try to adjust to the situation by fruitive activities, thinking that the resultant actions will make them happy. They do not know that no kind of material body anywhere within the universe can give life without miseries. The miseries of life, namely birth, death, old age, and diseases, are present everywhere within the material world. But one who understands his real constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Lord, and thus knows the position of the personality of Godhead, engages himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Consequently, he becomes qualified to enter into the Vaikuntha planets, where there is neither material, miserable life nor the influence of time and death. To know one's constitutional position means to know also the sublime position of the Lord. One who wrongly thinks that the living entity's position and the Lord's position are on the same level is to be understood to be in darkness and therefore unable to engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. He becomes a Lord himself and thus paves the way for the repetition of birth and death. But one who, understanding that his position is to serve, transfers himself to the service of the Lord, at once becomes eligible for Vaikuntha Loka. Service for the cause of the Lord is called Karma Yoga or Buddhi Yoga, or in plain words, devotional service to the Lord. So I thought I would stop with that verse, and Prabhupada's explaining. So we operate in this world as though we're the Lord's. I am the center. I think everything revolves around me, and by false ego, I think that everything that belongs to me is mine. This body is me, and everything in relationship to the body is mine. I think I can control my children. I want to control my husband or my wife. I want to be the big boss of all things. And but someone who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead realizes oneself as the servitor of that Supreme Person, and realizes, Prabhupada says, the sublime position of the Lord. So does anybody know what this word sublime means? Sublime. What does sublime mean? Anybody know?
Like below? Underneath?
No, sublime is a description of the position of Krishna. So sublime is something that inspires great awe and reverence, something very majestic and glorious. So Prabhupada describes Krishna as sublime, and the position of Krishna as the Lord as sublime. So sublime means the transcendental, majestic, awe-inspiring wonderfulness of Krishna's position as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, but when someone doesn't understand themselves as the servitor of Krishna, and they think that myself and the Lord are the same, like that young man I was describing, he thought that by the contamination of impersonal philosophy, he thought he was the same as God. And This is a type of darkness when someone is unable to engage in the loving devotional service of the Lord, and they cease action because they're afraid of being entangled in action or being entangled in the material world. So this young man was preferring laziness to doing some sincere, humble, devotional service for the pleasure of Krishna. So I think it's a really good example. I often think about him because when someone is a personalist or a devotee of Krishna, that person knows that he or she is an eternal servant of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's a great honor to do any service for Krishna, to sweep the floor or to make a flower garland or to do an arti or to chant Krishna's name or to read Bhagavad Gita. So in bhakti, we understand that it's our dharma. What does it mean to act in dharma? It means to act in harmony, right? With the natural order of the way Krishna has set up the universe, right? So when we understand that it's our dharma to serve, then we can actually be transferred to the Vaikuntha, eternal Vaikuntha planets and leave this material world altogether. And this kind of service for the pleasure of the Lord, Prabhupada is explaining, is called Buddhi Yoga. So what about dharma? Dharma, it's a word we throw around a lot, right? People use it a lot, but Prabhupada explains it in such a beautiful way that what is the dharma of water, for example? Water is by nature wet, it's liquid. In an artificial state, it may be hard and frozen, but then when it's taken out of the freezer, it naturally returns to that liquid state. So Srila Prabhupada explains that the dharma of the living beings is to serve, that the mother is serving the child, the husband is serving the wife is serving the husband, the employee is serving the boss or the customer, and the politician says that they're trying to serve the voters. Sometimes they're only serving their own selves, right? But ultimately, the ultimate dharma is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, that the only real true way that we can be truly satisfied is when we perform this uninterrupted and unmotivated service to Krishna. What does the unmotivated part mean? It means without false ulterior motives for my own pleasure, masked motives, that I'm really doing this to get name and fame, or I'm really doing this for some other selfish reason, or to become a great scholar, to acquire mundane wisdom. But to have unmotivated, uninterrupted service to Krishna, the Lord who is beyond the reach of the material senses. So I wanted to give you another example that I think is really a good one. That once in Mayapur, the septic system got backed up, and there was the toilets overflooded, and there was muck filling up the fields. And Srila Prabhupada was looking over the wall on the veranda, and he was seeing that the Gurukula boys had been asked to hike their dhotis up high, and these young boys were wading through this muck, trying to get the drains unstuck. I don't know who asked them to do that, but in any case, they were doing it. And Srila Prabhupada said that he made a very interesting comment. He said, this is real Brahman, that they're willing to do any service for the pleasure of Krishna. So when someone is under the disguise of false pride and false Brahminical thinking, they might think, oh, I would never do something like that. That would be for the low-class people to do. But Prabhupada made the comment that these boys were willing to do any service for the pleasure of Krishna, and this was a real Brahmin. So in Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, verses 16 through 19, Krishna explains that seeing inaction in action In other words, when someone works in Krishna consciousness, they're not getting any karmic reaction. So that they might be working very hard, but they don't get any karmic reaction because they're doing it for the pleasure of Krishna. And by the same token, action in inaction, someone may be doing nothing, like this lazy boy that I was telling you about. So he may be doing nothing out of fear or laziness, but he's going to get a karmic reaction, even though he is doing just being lazy, because in his inaction, there is actually karmic reaction. So karma is defined as actions that have good and bad reactions, right? And then there's vikarma, which is actions that are prohibited or have a sinful reaction, to do sinful things. And then akarma is work without reactions to work. And Krishna, this is Krishna conscious action, and it gives us freedom from all reactions. So also in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, another aspect of this I thought to consider is that there are 5 factors of action: the body, the performer, the various senses, the many different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the super soul. So when we think, I'm doing this all by myself, I'm the cause of action, and therefore I'm going to be the enjoyer of this action. And of course, that means I will have to also suffer. I did it all by myself, like a little child might say. But this kind of pride binds us to action, because actually we have to always remember that there are always those 5 factors. Again, the body, the performer, me who's doing something, the various senses of the body, that I don't even know how those senses are working, the many different kinds of work that might be done, and ultimately the ultimate factor of action is the super soul, who gives the permission, right? So, and then Bhagavad Gita 18th chapter 2nd verse says, to give up action based on material desire is true renunciation. And it's so interesting to think of this kind of Oh,
Yes.
can you hear me now? Okay. So I was just saying that this is the mystical and paradoxical nature of Krishna consciousness, that when we try to give up our own selfish and personal desires and try to serve Krishna's desires, he fulfills our desires beyond our wildest imagination. So there's so many stories of the Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis. There's a story of when Rupa and Sanatan Goswami were living in such extreme renunciation, and Rupa Goswami had the idea, oh, I would like to make a feast for my brother Sanatan. And then a young girl, a beautiful young girl, came walking by and brought him a basket full of so many ingredients for cooking a feast. He was a very good cook, actually, Rupa Goswami. And so he was so happy, and he prepared a lovely feast for his brother Sanatan, for the pleasure of the devotee. And Sanatan, when after Rupa Goswami, his brother, offered the prasadam and presented this lovely feast to his brother, Sanatan said, we're just living here as renunciates in the Vrindavan forest. Where did you get all these fancy ingredients? And Rupa Goswami said, well, there was this lovely young girl, and she came up, walking up to me with a basket, and she said that all these ingredients were given to me by her mother, and her mother told her to give them to me. And Sanatan Goswami said, oh, don't you realize you've just accepted service from Radharani? We're supposed to be serving Radha and Krishna, and here you're accepting service from Radharani. So this is the mystical nature of Krishna consciousness, that by serving Krishna and not looking for selfish results ourselves, we become so enriched and blessed that Krishna is always actually in competition with his devotees to try to serve them more than they're serving him. So I have some other thoughts, but I wanted to leave some time for questions or comments or reflections. Did this bring up anything for any of you that you would like to share?
I'm gonna unmute. But